She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. You know, the Wall Street Journal today reported the stock market stocks fall on tariff and consumer sentiment fears. The Dow dropped more than 700 points. The NASDAQ slid nearly 3%. AP reports the Department of Veteran Affairs is planning a reorganization that includes cutting over 80,000 jobs from the sprawling agency that provides health care and other services for millions of veterans. NBC News reports Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is moving to downsize the Social Security Administration with office closures, cut back, and phone services. The New York Times reports Americans hoping for some relief on inflation suffered a setback in the month of February as new data showed underlying price pressures intensifying even before the latest escalation in the trade war. This is an interesting array of data points indicating that as a country, we're not doing very well. How are Trump's policies affecting the African American community? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is there's a lot of activity in Trump Redux, a lot of volatility. What impact is all of this having on the psyche and lives of those in the African American community? My guest is the CEO of the National Association of Social Workers, who works so closely serving the community with housing, mental health care, and a vast array of other issues. Dr. Anthony Estreet, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Wilmer. I'm happy to be here. March is Social Work Month, so let me start by saying happy Social Work Month to all the amazing social workers out there for all of the things that we're doing and experiencing right now, but certainly advocating on behalf of individuals, families, and communities that we serve.
So to that point, this is National Social Work Month. Social workers are more than essential allies of those in need. As a social worker, what are you and your colleagues seeing? What are you all experiencing on the ground with the patients, with the clients that you serve?
You know, I think that we're seeing there was already an increase in mental health symptoms and symptomology following COVID. I think we're seeing certainly increases in anxiety, increases in depression, and a lot of uncertainty as a result of the executive orders that have started since January 20th, but have continued on into this day. And so we're seeing a lot of individuals you mentioned earlier around the Department of Veterans Affairs. You're seeing a lot of individuals who are trying to figure out, like, how are they going to access services? How are they going to access benefits? But even more surprising, we're seeing social workers now having to access services themselves because they're being laid off or terminated from federal jobs that they thought were they were going to go into their retirement.
How are these issues manifesting themselves in a daily, in a weekly? What types of symptoms, what types of issues are being brought to you, to your colleagues, in the settings in which they're working?
So we're seeing issues of anxiety. We're seeing issues of depression. Certainly, people just really going into this space of, how are we going to survive, and how are we going to do our job, right? You know, social workers have consistently been the backbone and the safety net that has kept our society from plummeting into, you know, I would say pure chaos. And now when we're starting to see cuts that impact the social work profession, we're also going to see those impacts that heighten anxiety, heighten awareness, heighten people's fear of what's to come next. I think that what we're seeing, especially with many of these cuts, are just people not knowing what the next move is, whether they have to tap into their savings in their retirement, or whether they're going to have to dust off their resume to find new jobs. I think more and more people are understanding that this is a very different administration and we have to respond in a very different way. And so as we talk about the impact on mental health, we also have to talk about the shortage of mental health practitioners. Social workers are the largest providers of behavioral health services in the United States. But when we start to see reductions in those jobs and in those benefits, that creates a perfect storm for poor mental health outcomes.
Are we seeing where we are right now in all of this? A lot of people want to immediately turn to Donald Trump and say, this is a Trump issue, but we know that we can go back to the Reagan administration and the deinstitutionalization of individuals, which we now see it manifesting itself through the housing crisis, through the homelessness crisis, the number of people that are panhandling or walking down the street just talking to themselves. We're seeing all types of antisocial behavior manifesting itself, and we can't just turn to Donald Trump and say, this all just started with either the first or the Trump Redux administration. We can take this all the way back to Ronald Reagan.
No, absolutely. I think the concern around mental health has been going on for decades. And really, you know, each administration responds to that in the way that they see best at that time. We've certainly seen administrations that have increased funding for mental health services, and we're certainly seeing administrations that are reducing funding for mental health. I think at the end of the day, we have to understand that mental health is something that we should all care about. From the mental health wellness to also addressing mental health challenges that people may experience. And so understanding that in order for people to address their mental health challenges, there has to be providers in order for people to address mental health wellness. And so what we're seeing is really the full spectrum of mental health, from individuals that certainly have ongoing mental health challenges that they take active medication for and they see a therapist and psychiatrist to address, to people who are really just now trying to figure out, how do I deal with this increased anxiety or depression that I feel as a result of what I'm consuming from the news, or the fear of me possibly having to lose my job. And so we're seeing it on both ends of those spectrums, from caring for individuals with mental health challenges to also seeing people enter into the mental health system that are just trying to find their space of normalcy again.
Cherie says, I love social workers. I know many, and they are underpaid. That is very true. As I was saying to you before we came on, I am incredibly partial to social workers because my mother was a professor of social work, and Kevin Baptiste says, I work with social workers on a daily basis. Much respect. So far, we've been talking about social workers dealing with individuals, but my mother's area of expertise was family practice. talk a little bit about what you're seeing as it relates to families in need of support.
I mean, certainly we're going to see the increase in terms of families that need more support. One of the things that we have to think about, right, is as we look at this administration and the reductions that they're having, we also have to pay attention to the budget that was proposed. They are proposing $880 billion in cuts. Now, if you know about the federal budget, you know that they cannot achieve those cuts without impacting Medicare and Medicaid. If you know about Medicare and Medicaid, those are our social safety nets that really impact and help to keep our families connected to healthcare, keep our families connected to different resources around food and shelter. And so when we see these reductions, we know that some of our most vulnerable populations, from children to some of our older adults that are past retirement age or have disabilities, are going to be impacted. And so when we think about family supports, we know that some of those benefit programs are going to be cut that are basically the lifeline for a lot of consumers that we serve. I saw an article more recently that's talking about some of the housing vouchers that are out there that keep people from that are experiencing housing instability from being evicted, and that program has stopped. That came out of the HUD administration, and so when we think about families, what we can see is that there's going to be more families entering into the systems. We know that stress from loss of employment or not being able to make ends meet oftentimes shows up in the household in terms of anger, aggression, isolation. And so we're looking at what does this look like for children and families. When this also occurs, we see possible kids that may not show up to school on time. And so this is going to have an exponential effect on families and children as we see. I mean, we're just 2 months into this administration, so we're going to see this as we go on within this administration.
And you just mentioned the budget numbers and the fact that they're looking to reduce budgets. And traditionally, when we've talked about budget cuts, they've talked, of course, about a cut in services. But now we are not only seeing a cut in services, we're seeing the elimination or the attempt to eliminate entire agencies. And that is now getting to the very structural nature of not only how services will be provided, but more importantly now, who will provide the services. I mean, you cut 80, I mentioned the number in the intro. Let me see if I can find it quickly here. 80,000 jobs from the Department of Veteran Affairs, when I don't think I'd be telling tales out of school to say they haven't been an effective agency in 50 years. And now and I just picked that number out of the hat. Now they're talking about cutting 80,000 jobs to veterans.
Yeah.
You're decimating the agency. You're not merely cutting back. Well, instead of having a program Monday through Friday, now we're only going to have it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They're talking about shutting down entire agencies.
Yeah, and I think that is where the growing concern is, right? It's not just a program modification, it's the elimination of services. And so as we see these eliminations, we would be right to ask, so what happens now, right? And so using the example that you provided with the Department of Veterans Affairs, as we are eliminating all those positions, as we're eliminating all of those programs, who's going to be there to stand in the gap to serve the veterans, those individuals that raised their hand and volunteered and said that they will stand and protect our country. And so we should be able to provide those services to them for that the selflessness that they did and gave for our country. And now they're trying to figure out, hey, I need to just figure out how I'm going to be able to maintain my mental health, how am I going to be able to maintain my medication, and who's going to be there to help me address the resources that I need. And so that creates that ongoing stress and anxiety that people feel in terms of just the uncertainty of what comes next. We are changing the day-to-day routine of individuals that may have, got up at 6 to go to work, and now they're not getting up because their job has been eliminated. Equally, those consumers of services who may have had a routine and a regimen to keep their sense of normalcy will now have to find a new routine to be able to find a new normal for themselves, even if that means not going to a day program or not going to a mental health session because that program was cut.
And you're talking about day programs and mental health sessions, access to services in terms of where the services are being provided. I'm originally from Sacramento, California, and one of the things that my mother realized was that most of the providers of the services were, for example, at the hospitals. Well, if you're in the African American community and you live 30 or 40 minutes away from the hospital, the probability of you going to get your medication, the probability of you going to meet your appointment with your social worker become greatly diminished because you now have to take 2 buses, 3 buses to get all the way across town. So one of the things that she did was she started opening mental health clinics in the community so that those services could be provided much closer to the home setting. Talk about some of the logistical problems that people have getting access to care.
I mean, you hit it right on the head. When we're talking about barriers to care, transportation is one of the biggest barriers. We want people to be able to experience treatment in their community, within their environment, so they know how to navigate those systems. But when we start shutting down different programs, it makes it harder for people to navigate that space. And so, we already know that treatment compliance within mental health is something that we need to improve as a nation. At the same time, understanding that when treatment is accessible, when we use an interdisciplinary approach where a person can come get their mental health, their health screening, see their foot doctor, manage their diabetes all in the same space, they have better outcomes. And so when we think about community care, it really does create an opportunity for us to, one, make sure that people are getting their needs met in one space so they don't have to make multiple appointments or take multiple transportation, but 2, making sure that there's that continuity of care. So when I'm a mental health therapist and I say, oh, your blood pressure, you seem to be concerned about your blood pressure, let's walk you across the hall so you can talk to your primary care doctor about your blood pressure today, right? And so there's this seamlessness that comes from community care and community clinics that we're just going to see how we have to navigate as we create more barriers. So when we shut down treatment programs and different things, what may have taken somebody 1 bus to get to may take them 3 or 4. The likelihood of them maintaining their appointments is going to decrease because of the amount of barriers that are there. And that's just talking about transportation. We're not even talking about, how this is going to impact overall when all of this is creating, like I said, the perfect storm. When this perfect storm comes together and people are seeing reductions in their benefits, they're seeing reduction in transportation. We're going to see a backlog on the amount of transportation because, yes, people can use public transportation, but what about those individuals that need medical transportation that is provided through a different funding source? We're going to see reductions in that as well.
Talk a little bit about, from a practical application perspective, being a social worker, because you and I are both in the academic setting. We're both college professors. So you talk to kids about what they're majoring in. You'll hear psychology, you'll hear sociology, of course, pre-med, those kinds of things. Rarely do you hear anybody talking about majoring in social work. Right. And particularly in the African American community and the need for African American males in the profession.
Yeah, and so social work is again, it was a choice that I made in terms of going into this field, but it was also because I had a mentor, Mike Green, who showed me the path to social work. I think part of this is, when we get into the field of social work, we oftentimes have a branding that social workers only work in child welfare, and typically we're cast as taking children. While that is part of social work in itself, social work has expanded so far beyond just child welfare. We are in healthcare. We are in technology. We're in financial administration services.
You're in the prison system. You're in
yes,
incarcerated.
we're in the prison system. And the idea is, within our social work parameters, we look at the person in their environment and help them to achieve and reach their version of wellness and a functioning life. And so one of the things that I often say is, as social workers, we walk alongside our clients and help them to envision and fulfill the life that they want for themselves. And they are the experts in how they want to see their lives. And so some of this looks at, if a person is experiencing mental health challenges, what does that look like in terms of mental health care? For some people, it may be going into an office and talking to your therapist in an office setting. When I started out as a therapist, I worked at an adolescent treatment center, and that meant that my kids didn't want to sit in the office. We would talk about therapy on the basketball court. And so having this background in social work and using that person and environment perspective, it really is about understanding the environmental stressors and environmental factors that help to shape the lens of how this person wants to live. And in that, we use our skill set to help them to achieve that, whether that may be through stable housing, whether that may be through resources around food, healthcare, whether that may be in terms of family therapy, helping them to repair relationships in their life. Social workers are everywhere, and we really impact the profession. I mean, we impact the society from that individual level all the way up to the policy and legislative level.
What about the need for more African-American males in the profession?
Yeah, there's always a growing need for African Americans, but more specifically African American males in the profession. I get to talk to my colleagues at different associations that social work in itself is one of the most diverse professions in terms of addressing mental health. We have about 22% in terms of diversity across our profession, where other professions are seeing 1%, 4%, and 7%. And so while we are able to brag that we have 22% in terms of diversity, that is a number that needs to increase. And that means that we need to do a better job of reaching out to black men, black women, people of color, to invite them into this profession, but to recruit them earlier on. When you look at some of our STEM professions, they recruit as early as elementary school. And so when we think about our more liberal arts and health professions such as social work, we need to start also reaching out earlier and connecting people with the idea that social work is a viable profession and a profession that is growing. We're one of the fastest growing professions according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we're projected to be over 833,000 by 2033.
Wow. So you all, as you've just very clearly and eloquently articulated, you all are on the front lines of defending marginalized communities against pushback. And we are now seeing, and we can put this one on the doorstep of the president, attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, heightened racism, dealing with immigrant and migrant issues, the LGBTQ community and their rights. There are a number of issues that have developed and have grown over the years. So the broad spectrum of issues that you confront and that you manage has grown and is continuing to grow.
No, absolutely. And I want to be 100% clear. Yes, there are a lot of executive orders coming out, but when we think about the social work profession, diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice are interwoven into our profession. Even when you say, "Oh, let's remove diversity, equity, inclusion," it is apparent and important for social workers to remember that it is part of our code of ethics to engage in social and political action to benefit our clients and communities. But the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice are very foundations of what social work is built on. And so when we, again, use that person and environment perspective, we are literally understanding how this person sees the world and using that lens to help them to achieve what that looks like for them. And so, yes, we're constantly advocating on behalf of increased opportunities for our diversity, equity, inclusion, increased opportunities for our LGBTQAI2S plus communities, increased opportunities around reproductive health. And so we're going to always advocate in that space. And one of the things that has really come to light as we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion is just how this administration has taken diversity, equity, and inclusion and relegated it to just race and gender, when diversity, equity, and inclusion is far more than just race and gender. It's really how do people access and feel included as part of their community, whether that is a church, whether that is a school or employment setting. It's how do people assimilate within their environment and feel like they actually belong and that they matter in those spaces.
You know, I remember when my mother was in practice, in Sacramento was one of the resettlement areas for a lot of Vietnamese immigrants, and particularly, I think, in the Hmong community. Mm-hmm. And there was this incredible influx of Vietnamese families that were sent to Sacramento. And so there were a lot of conflicts in the city in terms of how to absorb these individuals, how to integrate these individuals into the community. And then you also had issues with their children in schools and not speaking the language. I use this as an example just to demonstrate the diversity, no matter what your interest is in, no matter if you are interested in helping the community, there's a vast array of avenues you can take to within the area of social work that can be incredibly, incredibly important and invaluable.
No, absolutely. Social workers are everywhere, and we have a wide array of sectors that people can go into. Again, you know, when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it can mean a lot of different things. And the beautiful thing about diversity, equity, inclusion is also that there's intersectionalities. We don't have to focus on one thing. And so, for example, I'm a Black man, so issues that relate to Black men are certainly of concern with me. But also, you know, I can be concerned with issues of Black women, of brown men and women. But really thinking about how does that show up? And again, just reminding people that, you know, the United States is one of the most diverse places in the world, right? And no matter how many executive orders people write, we're not getting less diverse. In fact, we're going to get more diverse. And so as a profession, as a country, we have to learn how to interact and how to become more culturally sensitive and culturally aware of what's happening in our communities, and how do we engage so that people can feel connected and a part of.
Wow. Well, that's just phenomenal. Dr. Anthony Estreet, I know your schedule today is incredibly tight, and you fit us in a very small window. And again, this is national social work. You're with the National Association of Social Workers, and March is National Social Work Month.
Yes.
How do people that are interested in either getting service or finding more information on the social work profession, where do they go?
Yes, please make sure you check us out on our website at www.socialworkers.org, where you can find out about the field of social work, our profession, the different practice areas, and some of our advocacy work as we continue to engage in social justice and political action. We also have a national conference coming up in June in Chicago. So please, if you're in the Chicago area or you want to check out more and engage with social workers, please register to come to our conference. I think this is the time now for coalition politics. So as social workers, as people that care about what's happening in our country, we're looking to build more coalition politics to be able to continue our advocacy work, but to also continue that fight for social justice.
Again, Dr. Anthony Estreet, my brother, thank you so much. Got you out on time. 06.
Appreciate you.
Okay, man. Take care.
All right now.
All right. Thank you. So folks, we've still got some more time. Here's a question for you. Is it possible that Republicans could lose the majority in the House in 26. This is from the Washington Post. The Republican Party, they say, is no longer at risk of losing control of the House if the results of upcoming special elections all go against them, but Democrats could still pile on pressure on Republicans ahead of the 2026 midterms. The perilous position of the Republicans' majority in the House was highlighted yesterday when President Trump announced he would be pulling New York Representative Elise Stefanik's nomination to be the next UN ambassador to the United Nations. And folks, some might see that as being relatively unimportant or inane, but I think it is a real indicator. It is a very important data point that people need to pay attention to, because it demonstrates the concern, the rise, in my opinion, it demonstrates the rising concern that the Republicans are having in terms of, if they give up seats that they currently hold, replacing those individuals with other like-minded Republican individuals is more challenging than they were originally anticipating. So Stefanik, Republican from New York, came from I think I want to say it was a district that Trump carried with like 33%. And so they, when he first came in office, felt very comfortable that they could pull her out of the House and send her over to the UN, and that they would have no problem replacing her. But now we're starting to see a little crack in the comfort, a little crack, a little challenge to the position. But so the question with that then for me becomes, and we've been talking about this on the show for quite a while, what are the Democrats doing? Because I think the approach of letting the Republicans implode, that seems to be becoming more prevalent in the minds of many Democrats than the idea of the Republicans are demonstrating some weakness, and now is the time to attack. And I think that that's a really, really, really dangerous approach, because it's very similar to the approach that the Democrats used in this last election, which you all know I have been saying for quite a while, which is one of the main reasons why they lost the election in 2024. Vice President Kamala Harris spent a lot of time on the campaign trail, spent a lot of time on television, telling the American people about the weaknesses in Donald Trump's game. But we knew that. We know that. What she was not telling us, what the Democrats as a party were not offering, were substantive pieces of legislation that would demonstrate to the American people how a Democratic president, how a Kamala Harris administration, how a democratically controlled House and a democratically controlled Senate would improve the lives of American citizens. They did not do that. Her plan, her offer of $25,000 for first-time home buyers, The economists that I spoke to, like Dr. Richard Wolff and Dr. Radhika Desai and Dr. Jack Rasmus and Dr. Linwood Tawhid, all of these economists that I spoke to, they all said the same thing. All that's going to do is raise the price of a house on the market by $25,000. Why? Because when a homeowner knows that there's $25,000 more in the bank account of the person buying the house, you got $25,000 more to spend. I'm going to give you a price of a house up $25,000 more to spend it on. That you don't have to have a PhD in economics to figure that one out. So there, and I'm not trying to rehash the Harris campaign, but it is of recent enough history for us to draw upon it and learn from it, and hopefully not make the same mistakes in 2025 and in 2026 that they made in 24. But unfortunately, they seem to be hell-bent on heading down the same path. What they really need to be focusing on right now, in my humble opinion, is proposing legislation. Proposing legislation that would make it more difficult for Donald Trump to close the Department of Education, make it more difficult for the administration to cut those 80,000 jobs in the Department of Veteran Affairs. And I realize that the Democrats don't have control of the House. They don't have it control of the Senate. But you'll be demonstrating to the American people that you are focusing on improving their life circumstance, and you will also force the Republicans to respond to your initiative. And they're not demonstrating any initiative. It doesn't make any sense. And another big fallacy or hole in their logic is all of these disgruntled Republicans, all of these angry Democrats that find themselves languishing, toiling in the fields as Donald Trump is wreaking his havoc. They seem to figure that somehow those disgruntled Americans are just going to turn away from the Republican Party and turn to the Democrats. That's not going to happen. It didn't happen in 24. What makes you think it's going to happen in 26? What makes you think it's going to happen in 28? If you don't offer these people something to turn to, they won't turn to you. They'll either go third party or they'll stay home, as evidenced in 24. What do they say one of the definitions of insanity is? Engaging in the same behavior time after time after time and respecting a different outcome. So what makes anybody think? What makes Hakeem Jeffries think when he says, in response to Mike Johnson saying that, oh, the protesters that were showing up at the town halls, that those were paid protesters, and Hakeem Jeffries' response is, well, we don't have to pay protesters. The people are with us. No, when you look at the data, no, they're not. So what makes you think they will be when you're not offering them anything? Folks, I know I've been saying this And I've been saying it, and I'm going to keep saying it. Why? Because it needs to be continually said until some people in the elite realms of the Democratic Party start to understand that what I'm saying is true. So I got to keep saying it until it starts to resonate and register. Here's another example. I don't know how many of you all, and I'd love to see a response from you all in the chat. How many of you all have been seeing these commercials from Donald Trump or from political action committees that support the president? There's a commercial about education. You've got this this Latina who says how grateful she is for school choice because she now has options in terms of where to send her child to school. There's another commercial talking about the benefit of the tax breaks and how everybody got $1,300 from Donald Trump in the last administration, and now we have that the tax breaks are about to expire, and you got to and so you've got to support Donald Trump's tax breaks. There are all of the as he signs these different executive orders, or as the commercials usually run right around the time that the news is on. So here on the East Coast, I tend to see them around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock. They're different, maybe about 4 or 5 different commercials, 4 or 5 different issues. My question is, where are the Democrats' commercials in response to the rhetoric that the Republican Party is putting out relative to its agenda? Because people ask me all the time, they say, Wilmer, where are you? You're not providing any solutions. Well, yes, I am. And this is one of them. Why aren't the Democrats running commercials explaining to the American people, you voted for this guy, this is what you're getting, here's our remedy? And that's the operative, very important element of all of this. Where is the remedy? Because the remedy is not being provided. It is not being articulated. I said this Wednesday, Bernie Sanders has presented a very good idea as it relates to Social Security. He's talked about raising or eliminating the ceiling on the Social Security tax. That's a great idea. I've been articulating that for about 15 years, but that's a great idea. It will do 3 things primarily. It will make Social Security solvent. It will enable the government to increase Social Security benefits. And it'll also enable the government to lower the retirement age. 3 great ideas. There's no downside to doing this. And if the Democrats were able to gain control of the House and the Senate, it would be fairly easy for them to pass. But as you see Bernie out on his anti-oligarchy tour, Bernie and AOC out on this anti-oligarchy tour, you don't hear very many other Democrats with them. So as Bernie has articulated this idea on Social Security, you don't hear other Democrats backing the plan. Why? Because Bernie is out there. We talked about this yesterday with Dr. Montero. Bernie is out there as a lone soldier. Bernie is out there as the bell cow or out there as the sheepdog. His job is to herd Democratic voters back into the Democratic Party with very logical policy initiatives that unfortunately the Democrats will not support. So what all of this demonstrates is there's no consistent messaging with the party, with the Democratic Party, other than Donald Trump is an idiot, which we already know, and he tells us that himself every day. So why, Democrats, do you feel compelled to continue to tell me this? There's no unity in messaging. Let me put it another way. There's no unified message. The Democrats are not all reading from the same script, and there's no unified messaging. So they're all over the map, and most of them aren't really saying anything that relates to improving your quality of life. And here's where they should start. Yes, Cherie, both sides are idiots. Well, that might depend, Cherie, on how you define an idiot. Because what I would say is that they are both co-opted by the same financial interests, that they're both being paid by Boeing. They're both by the Boeing lobbyists. They're both being paid by Lockheed Martin. They're both being paid by the same benefactors, which is why, for all intents and purposes, they're singing the same tune. They're both being paid by AIPAC, which is why the Democrats, who historically, at least since the 60s, were supposed to be concerned about social issues, have become the party of war. And what did Dr. King tell us? War is the enemy of the poor. But that message, that mentality no longer seems to resonate within the minds of the Democratic Party elite. S.K. Simmons, thank you so much for that super sticker. Will the recent executive order promoting whitewashing history at the Smithsonian have any meaningful negative impacts for the future? Yes, it will. Yes, it will, because that will become just another element in the distortion of the narrative, which is why it'll become even more important for us as African Americans and other people of color to be sure that we understand the narrative, that we understand the story, that we understand history, and that we tell the proper story to our children and to those that are within our spheres of influence. So it'll have and not only will it have a negative impact on people of color, but it'll also have a negative impact on European Americans as well, because they're not going to get the right story. They're not going to get the right information. And ask yourself this. He's targeting the Smithsonian. They're talking about specifically the African American History Museum. Are they also going to go into the Museum of the Holocaust? Are you going to see J.D. Vance walking through the Museum of the Holocaust and talking about the narrative there, and that narrative has to be corrected? Probably not. Probably not. Cherie, you're talking about Brzezinski's book. Which book, Cherie, are you specifically referring to? So here's another interesting tidbit, interesting data point. Steve Bannon fears Donald Trump could go to prison. Now listen to this. I think this is an Axios story. I could be wrong, but Steve Bannon, remember him, the Donald Trump whisperer, has predicted Donald Trump, quote, is going to prison unless Republicans win the 2028 presidential election. Trump's former White House chief strategist, Steve Bannon, the Donald Trump whisperer, made these comments yesterday on his War Room podcast. He said, God forbid we don't win in 2028. President Trump is going to prison just like Bolsonaro in Brazil, end quote. So let's unpack that knapsack a little bit. Why would Steve Bannon say something like this right now? Well, I don't know, because I haven't talked to Steve Bannon. But let me throw out a couple of ideas. One is, this is a rallying cry as Republicans are starting to feel threatened as they are looking at the turnout and outcomes in state midterm and special elections. And let me give you, what do I mean by that? Well, Democrat James Andrew Maloney narrowly won a special election for the Pennsylvania State Senate seat in a stretch of Republican-leaning suburbs and farming communities, scoring an upset in a territory that a Democrat hasn't represented in the chamber, that chamber being the Pennsylvania State House, for 136 years. Maloney's victory over Republican Josh Parsons this past Tuesday might provide a light in the darkness for Democrats. This is from the Washington Post, struggling to unify around a strategy to counter Trump. So the Republicans lose a seat in the Pennsylvania State Senate that Republicans have held for 136 years. That is a data point that is concerning to Republicans, not only on the state level, but on the national level as well. Because you take that result from Tuesday in Pennsylvania and you combine that with the ire and the anger and the utter disgust that Republicans are demonstrating at the town hall meetings that Speaker Mike Johnson has now asked Republicans not to have anymore because they can't stand that optic. That tells you Republicans are shook. Republicans are concerned. Republicans are afraid. The bloom is off the rose for Donald Trump. The bloom is off the rose. The fish spoils from the head down. They're starting to smell the stench. Or as Hugo Chavez said at the UN about George Bush, the sulfur. He said he was smelling sulfur in the room. So They're concerned. So Steve Bannon comes on his show yesterday and now talks about, you realize Donald Trump could go to prison in 28 if we don't rally behind him. He could go to prison if we don't win. It's rhetoric. And who does he compare Donald Trump to? He compares Donald Trump to Jair Bolsonaro. And why is Bolsonaro in trouble in Brazil? Because he tried to assassinate the current president of Brazil, Lula da Silva. He tried to foment a coup in Brazil. His stupid behind should go to prison. He tried to assassinate the president. So, see, Steve Bannon isn't telling you the whole story. Now, who is Jair Bolsonaro? Well, they called him at one point, they called him the Trump of the tropics. They used to call Jair Bolsonaro the Trump of the tropics. Why? Because after Steve Bannon helped Donald Trump win in 16. Win in 16, where did Steve Bannon go? He went to Brazil. He took that same playbook, that same Trumpian conservative populist BS. He took that same playbook to Brazil and helped get Bolsonaro elected in Brazil. And what did Bolsonaro do in Brazil? He did the same damn thing Donald Trump did here. And when Lula won in Brazil, Bolsonaro tried to assassinate him. Thank you, Kevin Baptist, for the $10 super sticker. Are those optics strong enough to tear down the sanctuaries set in place in the system, Doc? I'm not sure I understand the question. Are those optics, which optics? You're talking about the Republican bad optics. Are they strong enough to tear down the sanctuary set in place in this system? I elaborate on that, Kevin, please, if you could, so that I won't be struggling to give you an answer. I'll be able to give you an intelligent answer. Kevin, you say yes. Yes to what? I don't get it. So understand, Steve Bannon isn't telling you the whole Bolsonaro story. Bolsonaro should be in court. Bolsonaro should be going to jail because he tried to murder the current president. So, see, this is where you have to be a little more of a discerning reader, and you have to read some Lee Ricks. Thank you very much for that super sticker. You have to be a little broader in the sources that you turn to. There's a great, if y'all aren't hip to Orinoco Tribune, I strongly suggest that you read, or that you at least look at Orinoco Tribune. Great website. Their stories, and they do some great, not only do they do Latin American analysis, they also do very good analysis of world events. Zionists are Nazis. Yeah. I would. Well, if they're not, they're cousins. They're first cousins. So anyway, so Steve Bannon on his show says that he's trying to use fear mongering because we know that fear mongering is one of the top two tactics that the conservatives or Republicans love to employ. Let me give you the tactics that they use in order. The top three. Here are the top three tactics that they use. They use fear mongering, and if fear mongering doesn't work, they use fear mongering, and then if that doesn't work, they use fear mongering. Those are the top three tactics that Republicans will turn to as they try to galvanize their bases and rally the troops. Fear mongering, and then if those two things don't work, they turn to fear mongering. And then if that doesn't work, then they'll probably turn to xenophobia, fear of others. Oh, that's another way of engaging in fear mongering. So after we go through that, in terms of Steve Bannon fostering or promoting the fear that Donald Trump could go to prison, and I seriously doubt that. For as despicable of a human being as Donald Trump is, 34 felony convictions, I still don't see. Oh, and James Brown, don't forget about fear mongering. Thank you for reminding me about that, James. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. You're right, because they will use fear mongering. I could be as wrong on this as the day is long, but I still don't believe that the American people would be comfortable seeing a former American president go to prison. I believe that the American public still has such reverence for the presidency, not the president, the presidency, the resolute desk, the person, the Oval Office, that they still have such respect for the Oval Office and what that office represents, that they could not stomach the idea of an American president going to jail, even though I believe that since we claim to be a country of laws and not of men, that sending his felonious behind to prison could probably be the best thing that could happen to the United States, because it would demonstrate no one is above the law, that you violate the law, that you jeopardize the Constitution, gotta go. That would demonstrate to the world that the United States actually does have some basis in law, that the United States actually does have a moral basis to what it says, let alone what it does, even though we know that's not true. I think it would prove that democracy can work, that no one is above the law. Kevin Baptist, sorry, the sanctuaries provided by a system that has so far protected Trump. Yes, I think that some of those sanctuaries could be, and as Dr. Montero talked about yesterday, should be under attack. But, or maybe that attack has to come from the grassroots. That attack has to come from us. That attack has to come from American citizens deciding that they're no longer going to, what's the word I'm looking for? When you abdicate, that Americans are no longer going to abdicate their responsibility as citizens, that they are actually going to reclaim their jobs as citizens and reclaim control of their country, of their constitution. In fact, one of the things that I was getting ready to get into and kind of confused myself, and I'm gonna get out of here in just a minute, but I want to make this point, is one of the first conversations, in fact, let me look this up because I can never remember now who is the chair of the DNC. I can't remember this guy's name. He's so innocuous. What is this guy's name? Kevin Martin. Kevin Martin is now the chair of the DNC. Never heard of Kevin Martin before he got elected. Don't know who he is. Don't know Kevin Martin from Boo the House Cat. And I know Boo the House Cat. My cousin Lynn's cat was named Boo. But anyway, the first thing that the way that the Democrats should start to frame this message is by answering this question: what's the responsibility of government? From their perspective as a party, what's the responsibility of government? Why did the framers of the Constitution frame a constitution? Start there. Start having discussions, start having town halls, start convening meetings where the members of the House and the members of the Senate start talking to the American people about what is the purpose of government. That's where they should start. Now, I teach this stuff, so I know the answer to those questions. And those questions aren't that hard to answer because Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Rousseau, Jefferson, they've all provided, Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, Fannie Lou Hamer, they've all provided answers to those questions. And those are the minds, Malcolm, those are the minds that they should be turning to articulate these answers to the American people. You start having those conversations and you'll be amazed. Then, Hakeem Jeffries, then you'll be able to say that the people aren't with you, but are starting to listen to you. Because right now, they are not only are they not with you, they aren't even listening to you. Why? Because you are irrelevant. Why? Because you aren't offering a damn thing. It's vaporware. You're offering them vaporware. You're offering them all sizzle and no steak. So with that, final point, because I know my lovely producer, she She's got to be on the move. So final point here is you got some Republicans that are talking about a third term for Donald Trump. Trump and his allies, this is from Newsweek magazine, have repeatedly teased the idea of him seeking a third term, even though we know that would violate the Constitution. All presidents are limited to 2 terms in office, not consecutive terms, 2. You can't go past 2. That's why a formerly sitting president cannot run as vice president after having served 2 terms. Why? Because it's possible that you would then, due to death of the vice president, become president, and you can't do that. But see, you can't dismiss that chatter as chatter. You can't dismiss this discussion of a possible third term for Donald Trump as just the rantings of idiots, because we are right now sitting in the midst of a president that is challenging the Constitution at every turn. So when you have someone like Steve Bannon who talks about Donald Trump is going to prison unless we win the 2028 presidential campaign, see, all of that fits into a narrative. And it's not that much of a stretch for Steve Bannon, even though I doubt that I would ever hear Steve Bannon say this. It's not that much of a stretch to have someone like Steve Bannon turn the conversation from, if we don't win in 28, Donald Trump goes to prison, and oh, we can't have that, to Donald Trump needs to serve a third term. You've got to pay attention to this, folks, because they don't make these comments in passing. They don't make these comments because they have nothing else better to say, even though they have nothing else better to say. They put these trial balloons out there so that they can get a sense of which way the wind is blowing. And these aren't Chinese spy balloons. The trial balloons they're putting up there are not Chinese spy balloons, which, by the way, were not spy balloons. They were weather balloons, but we're not going to rehash that story. You get my point. That's why, final point, that's why I say to y'all, pay very close attention to this deportation of Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador. Because if Donald Trump is able to get away with that, y'all could be next. Y'all could be next. Y'all could be next. So with that, and Ricky Hatcher, thank you for that $10 super sticker. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Let me thank you all today for joining me today. Thank you for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast. New shows next week. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, and talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all next week. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, blessed weekend. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.